Welcome to Good Thinking Live. Welcome, good thinkers from around the world. I'm glad you're here so we can gather together just for maybe a half an hour, like we do each week, to spend a little bit of time shoving away all the time we are forced to kind of think about what to think so that we can luxuriate in thinking about our thinking to improve how we think. So that's why we're here. That's what we're doing. And today we're going to be talking about a very sharp topic called philosophical razors. How many of you know or use or remember hearing, yeah, I kind of remember, or maybe you use them all the time, using philosophical razors in your life? Let us know, and also let us know who you are and where you're from in the chat, because it's so fun to see people from all over the world so that you understand that different places bring different perspectives and different people come at us from different viewpoints. And that's beautiful and wonderful and helps us improve how we think. So welcome everyone to the show. Let us know who you are and where you're from. And we will get started with the very first question, which other than who are you and where you're from. So I guess this is the third question technically. If you had a razor that could be used to cut ideas or situations or beliefs, maybe people from your life, I don't mean like cut them, but just clear them from your brain, cut these out, even temporarily, would you use it? Can you think of an idea or belief you'd like to set aside for maybe a day or an hour or just a few minutes so you could see what the world looked like a counterfactual? Would you use this razor? Yes or no? Let me know in the chat. Okay, so here are a couple of options. Like if you could cut anxiety out, or addiction, or jealousy, or depression, or dissatisfaction, or desire, would you use a philosophical razor to cut any of those things out of your life? All right. So whether you're joining live or later on, definitely participate in the chat because it makes it more interesting. So Arvid says, I would definitely use the razor. Me too. What would you use it on? Are you willing to share? Barkley, welcome from DC. Glad you're here. Would you use a philosophical razor? And if so, what would you use it to cut? Would you cut out imposter syndrome, or would you cut out guilt, or maybe something that you really believe, but you want to see, hey, what would happen if I didn't believe that? Just for a minute. No one needs to know. Would you use it? All right. And Michael, welcome from the snowy salutations from Toronto. Oh, is it snowy? I love it. I love it. I love it. Kind of wish we had snow today. Anyway, it's like nice outside. What's with this? Where's our snow? All right. What we're talking about today are philosophical razors. And a philosophical razor is a rule of thumb or heuristic that cuts out unlikely explanations or reasons for a phenomenon. So that's kind of what a razor is. And we'll get into there's lots of razors. Now, razors aren't laws, but even laws sometimes aren't laws, right? Pareto's law, whatever. Miller's law, Moore's law. These aren't necessarily like laws of nature, but they're kind of similar rules of thumb. These are philosophical razors help us make sense or explain or analyze, more importantly, analyze our own explanations or conclusions. Okay, so Michael says, yes, use the razor, cut out hate module. Ooh, I love it. How would you cut out hate or maybe even dislike? What would you do? What would that look like? Good. I love it. I love it. I love it. Because first of all, it's easy to think about cutting out things from other people. But what's harder is thinking about using that razor to shave on yourself. That makes it difficult. Razors shave off these unlikely conclusions. So here's a critical thinking question. Oh, maybe a good thinking question. Does the fact that a conclusion is cut out by a razor, and we'll see if you think about this at the beginning versus the end, does the fact that a conclusion is cut out by a razor, a philosophical razor, guarantee that a conclusion is false? Ha ha ha. Yes or no? Yes or no? See, if you're live, you kind of know what the yes or no pertains to. So it can be a little bit more fun. If you just come afterwards, you see yes or no, and you don't really know. Maybe it doesn't line up because there's a delay with the live stream. We've got people streaming now from YouTube Live and from LinkedIn Live, and there's a time delay for these. So I'm going to take off these banners so we can leave more room for your comments. All right. So as cool as razors are, they do help us make decisions and solve problems quicker and easier, but they're not unbreakable laws or rules. They're not right 100% of the time, but they're often right. And these can make these razors helpful as mental shortcuts. All right. So what's the most common razor you hear about? Anyone want to take a step? Don't say Gillette or Harry's Shave Club or Dollar Shave Club. What's the most common razor you hear about? There's a lot of them. Some are more useful than others. Some are kind of but we're going to cover two today. We're going to cover Occam's Razor, courtesy of William of Occam. Back when they didn't have surnames, they just said, Becky of Portland, and Hanlon's razor. But if you love today's discussion and you want to get into more razors on future episodes of Good Thinking, hold your judgment. You might not want to after today. Then you can say, hey, like to hear about more razors and how they can be used. All right. So Michael says, now you're bringing in subjectivity. It may be false to me, but not everyone else. And we are back to controversial discussions. You kind of skipped ahead because we're going to start with Occam's razor. And I this is one where people use this all the time to say, nope, Occam's razor, you're wrong and I'm right. Yeah, not so much. And I think Michael's kind of hit on one of the main reasons why, subjectivity. But a lot of people will talk about using Occam's razor, which essentially says, and I think a lot of people kind of get it wrong, but that's what philosophy is, debating all these things. It's not like I own the right explanation of Occam's razor. I think I have a way to think about Occam's razor that makes it more useful, but maybe William of Occam would be rolling in his grave if he heard me use this explanation, because he was a Franciscan monk, and it's a very interesting thing. He was kicked out of the church and all kinds of things, even though he was a very religious person. So the Occam's razor, in a fancy way, states that entities should not be multiplied without necessity. A lot of people take Occam's razor to mean that the simplest explanation for something, for a phenomenon, or for a conclusion, the simplest explanation is the best explanation. And some people take this to go even further, which is the simplest explanation is the most accurate explanation. How many of you think that is brilliant and true? Well, it reminds me, a number of years ago, we were in New Orleans. My family, we were all there. And we went New Orleans in the United States. It's fun because it's an old city for the United States. Those of you who are coming from outside the country, you're like, that's not old. That's nothing. But for United States, it's old. There's buildings and bars that go back to 1700, 1726 and stuff like that. Anyway, so there's a lot of lore and a lot of ghost stories and a lot of old buildings that you can at night, a lot of actors will take you through, or, paranormal stuff. They'll take you through. You can do ghost tours. As a matter of fact, in real estate in New Orleans, it's hilarious because they have to disclose whether the house or the property is haunted or not. Hilarious. Anyway, interesting. I shouldn't say hilarious, interesting. But we were on this ghost tour and they were showing us proof in this building that there were ghosts in the building. And they were showing us photographs with those kind of orbs that you see in photographs. And the person said something that I think just directly kind of Occam's razor helps us think about, which is the person opens it up and she points to it. She says, these are ghosts. There is no other explanation. Well, being, skeptics and kind of a little bit irreverent, my family, we kind of were like having to laugh. But the point is with Occam's razor is really looking at explanations. It's not about proving someone else wrong because they had a more complex explanation. It's really about assessing how you can create complexity out of things that can be more simple. And there may be a more simple explanation. And, you might say, well, a ghost is a much more simple explanation than light refraction. And this is where people kind of take Occam's razor in the wrong place. So I think a more useful way of thinking about Occam's razor is to think about the number of assumptions that you need to make when you're presented with multiple competing reasons or explanations for something. And there's a lot more assumptions that are buried in this is a ghost, there is no other explanation. But these assumptions are sometimes buried like a Russian nesting doll, assumptions within assumptions within assumptions. So the point is to just take a step back, and when you're analyzing explanations for phenomenon or for conclusions or even options, to try to look at how many assumptions are required for that conclusion to be true. And Occam's razor can help you think about simplifying or cutting out a lot of assumptions that you have to make. Now, assumptions is not evidence. Assumptions are not evidence, right? If you get more evidence for things, that is not an assumption. So you can't simplify an explanation by ignoring evidence. That's where it gets, and it's not supposed to be used to prove or disprove. And this is where subjectivity comes in. What is simpler? Is it simpler just to say, this is a ghost? Well, if you don't have a background in physics, it may be simpler for you. So that's where your circle of competency has to come in. So let's try some examples, shall we? Who is here? Let me know who is here. I know we've got a small group today because we didn't end up making the, I didn't get the thing in early enough to get into LinkedIn's office hours, but we'll try an example. Let's see what's more likely to be true. All right, so someone broke into my car and stole my backpack with my computer in it. Ready? What is more likely to be true if we're using Occam's razor, just for fun? A, I'll give 3 options. A, the thief was a competitor who wanted to get information from my computer to sabotage my company. By the way, this took place in Silicon Valley, so maybe. B, the thief is suffering from psychosis and drug addiction. Or C, the thief wanted something of value. What is more likely to be true? A, B, or C? Hint, this could also be a probability question. Anyone want to take a stab? Bonus points. So sometimes you can look at probability with Occam's razor, which is kind of interesting too, which requires fewer assumptions, A, B, or C. Okay, what about this one? Ready? A UFO in the sky is aliens from another galaxy or a type of aircraft or drone you haven't seen before. Which one is more likely to be true? Okay. Michael says C. Of course, C, even probabilistically, is more likely to be true because the other 2 options are require C. So so anytime you can shave away the probability of A happening versus the probability of A plus C plus D happening, you're always going to have a higher probability of just A happening than A plus anything else. That makes sense? All right, so Occam's razor can be looked at like a probability kind of problem. Okay, so Barkley says C. And then Michael for the question number 2, aliens from another galaxy, A, or the type of aircraft or drone you haven't seen before, of course, B. Yay! Fantastic. All right, so for people who have a delay, they may think Michael said B to the first one, but he said B to the second answer. And Barkley says B. Fantastic. Yay! All right. So for Occam's razor, what's the most valuable question, or what we call at Applied Curiosity Lab, we refer to as the MVQ. This is the question that you can ask that has the highest ROI. So for Occam's razor, I like to try to simplify things down to the MVQ, the most valuable question you can ask. And the MVQ for Occam's razor is, what's the explanation that requires the fewest assumptions? So you don't start by complex or far-fetched theories that are less likely, but this doesn't mean that you ever eliminate the far-fetched conclusions. It's not used to eliminate those things. Like, for example, in New Orleans, maybe that was a ghost, but it's not the most likely explanation based on assumptions, based on limiting the number of assumptions. So you can leave open possibilities for things that haven't been proven. It doesn't disprove. It helps you analyze your conclusions and your explanations for things in a cleaner way. And this is important because Occam's razor does not allow for the exclusion of evidence. So the simplest explanation doesn't account for all the available data or evidence. Because if the simplest explanation doesn't account for all of the available evidence, then it's not the best explanation. And Einstein said it well. I think he said it more clearly, perhaps, when he said everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. So there's one thing called Occam's duct tape, where it's the opposite, where Occam's duct tape is when someone approaches a problem with a ridiculously large number of assumptions. And then there's kind of a lot of the razors relate to each other. So how many of you have heard of the Carl Sagan standard? Anyone? The Carl Sagan standard? Some people call it Sagan's razor, which is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. How many of you can see how that relates to Occam's razor? Yeah. So if I make a claim that this is a ghost in my picture from New Orleans, then I need to have, that's an extraordinary claim. So I need to have extraordinary evidence. And that's what the James Randi Foundation did they had a challenge called the Paranormal Challenge that ran from 1964 to 2015. And they offered $1 million to anyone who could demonstrate any occult, paranormal, or supernatural ability of any kind. And of course, it was under agreed upon scientific testing criteria, and over 1,000 people applied to take it, but none was successful. So that's kind of an interesting little fun fact. All right. So this makes it hard when evidence provides or requires knowledge that you don't understand. So what do you do? A lot of what we hear about now, whether it's with a vaccine or business things or business analysis, or maybe you're not a data strategist or you haven't learned to understand probability and statistics, what do you do? Or even virology and how these things work, or, bacteria. What do you do when you don't understand the explanation for something? Well, how do you know if it's simplest? To Michael's point, the subjectivity, how do you know that it's simple when you don't understand it? Well, the key is to be aware of the boundaries of your circle of competency. So if you're not even able to understand how someone who claims to be competent arrives at their conclusions, then at that point, you may decide to hold your opinions a little less strongly. Okay? So what you want to do is maintain a healthy dose of skepticism, not cynicism, skepticism, while you seek RRV. You seek reliable, relevant evidence and check the validity. And Michael says it more clearly than I did. Ask questions. Ask questions. And to know what questions to ask, most valuable questions, is really, really helpful. But you already probably know that because you're here joining as regular good thinkers on the show. All right. So when these razors are used in debates, they're often used for both sides, whether it's theists versus atheists, whatever. That's really not the purpose of particularly Occam's razor or any of these razors. Okay. So the next one. Ready? So before we jump into Hanlon's razor, which is the second of the two razors we're going to talk about today, here are a few questions for you. Do you ever feel that the world is against you? Yes or no? Have you ever or do you ever feel that the world is against you? And I'll just say this. If you answered yes, you are not alone. But there's a related question. When it feels like the world is against you, what's the reason that pops into your mind? When you feel that the world is against you, what's the reason that pops into your mind? And here is the last question in this sequence. When it comes to understanding people in the world and the world, and this is controversial. Ready for a controversial question? Let's see if you can put. Does intent matter? Does intent matter? Michael admits sometimes it does feel like the world is against us. Okay, fantastic. The world is against me. We sometimes feel that way. This morning I kind of felt that way a little bit. Oh, anyway, but when that happens, what is the reason? So not conforming, excellent. Not conforming, fantastic. That's a great reason. When it comes to people in the world, does intent matter? Yes, intent matters, or no intent matters. I know that it's not it's not like a question that's completely uncontroversial, but Hanlon's razor makes us question whether that should be controversial, because here, and I'll ask a couple of questions to kind of get into Hanlon's razor before I reveal. Here are a few questions for you. Okay. So if your neighbor has a loud party on a school or work night till 3 a.m., what's more likely? A, they did this specifically to annoy you, or B, they're inconsiderate and didn't even consider whether this would bother or disturb you. What is more likely? So you can combine Occam's razor and you can combine Hanlon's razor. And Hanlon's razor essentially says, never attribute to malice or never attribute to evil that which can be adequately explained by neglect. That's kind of general, could be adequately explained by a lot of things, neglect or stupidity or naivete or lack of knowledge. But it just says, don't jump to attributing intention to evil when things could more adequately be explained by neglect. All right, welcome. Wait. Arvin says B. Okay, yeah, Arvin says B. They just don't realize. I'm going to say hi to Hussein. And unlikely explanations are presented in different proportions. Studying them all helps take appropriate decisions for each one separately. Yes. Fantastic. Excellent. Excellent contribution. All right. So long before Hanlon, Napoleon, I think it's funny when people take, like even Occam's razor, there was people before Occam that said these things and it got attributed to Occam, and same with Hanlon, because even back Napoleon Bonaparte famously said, never ascribe to malice that which is adequately explained by incompetence. So you could think, well, neglect isn't incompetence. The point of Hanlon's razor is don't just put evil intent as your first assumption, because statistically more likely there's a lot of other reasons, and most of them kind of relate to we're all the stars of our own show. Those people weren't even probably thinking about you. Now, that does not mean you ignore evil intent, and we'll get to that in a minute, because some people are evil. They're bigots, they're racist, they're sexist, they're all kinds of things, of course, and that motivates them toward a lot of things. But to jump to that first can lead you astray. So Michael says, or C, they're caught up celebrating something and we're not aware that they were a disturbance. Yes, that is a perfect example of Hanlon's razor. Now, it helps us remember that if someone acts in a way that affects us negatively, it could be because of carelessness or incompetence, or they're stupid or unaware of how they're affecting you. They don't know any better. It teaches us not to assume the worst intentions of others, not because we're just nicer people, but because it actually gets us closer to the truth. And it's not because we're magnanimous and we're so, giving someone the benefit of the doubt gives you the benefits that come from giving someone the benefit of the doubt. So it's a very tricky thing, the benefit of the doubt. If your friend ignores your text message inviting you to a New Year's Eve party, you could think, oh, they must be looking for a better option, or they're trying to avoid you, or maybe they just weren't thinking about you at all. So this is really important. The key is not to arrive at malicious intent prematurely. I want to tell you, before we wrap up, I want to tell you this cool story. I love this story about this famous German general, because he used Hanlon's razor in a way. See if you think that this is actually a use of Hanlon's razor. You have to let me know what you think. I don't know if any of you have heard this story. I hadn't heard this story. I was just preparing for this good thinking, and I thought I should dig in and get some more information. I came across this story, which I really, really love. Okay. And so how could this be used? Think about the story. How could this be used in a corporate setting today? And how could it be harmful? So how could it be helpful? And how could it be harmful? So think about that as I tell this short story. So here's how it worked. The German general decided to divide his officers into 4 groups. Okay. So group A, he said, and I don't know what method, but just in his own mind, he had some kind of criteria: clever, diligent, stupid, his words, stupid, and lazy. So clever, diligent, stupid, and lazy. And he found that sometimes these characteristics were combined. So he put he kind of married 2 of the characteristics and created 4 groups out of these combinations. And these are the combinations he came up with. Okay. Some were clever and diligent. Some were stupid and lazy. Some were clever and lazy. And some were stupid and diligent. And then, based on how he group these officers, here's what he came up with. So if the group was clever and diligent, they were placed in the general staff. Okay, I'm not sure quite what that means. It helps to hear the other ones. You can kind of see general staff. If the group was stupid and lazy, and he found that this made up 90% of the army, they were deemed suited to routine duties. So 90% were put into doing routine duties, standard soldier duties. Those are the ones that he deemed stupid and lazy. Anyone who is both clever and lazy was qualified for the highest leadership duties because it was determined that they possessed the intellectual clarity and composure necessary for difficult decisions. That's kind of counterintuitive. Once I hear it, I'm like, well, I guess I could fit that into making sense, but I don't know about you. What do you think? Would you have thought about that? Would you have thought that clever and lazy was qualified for the highest duties? Now, you can be cynical and go, yeah, we see that all the time. But really, if you were the manager at work and you secretly went home and you put all of your employees into these buckets, would you come up with the idea that you're going to put the clever, lazy ones in charge? I'm not so sure. But his greatest warning was for anyone that was stupid and diligent. And this really gets to Hanlon's razor a little bit and how it can be useful in an unexpected way. Because if his greatest warning was for anyone who was stupid and diligent, he determined that they were not to be entrusted with any responsibility because they will only, quote, they will only cause mischief. So it's like they had every intent to be a hardworking whatever, but they were stupid. Versus stupid and lazy, they're, you're just going to do what you're going to be told to do. Clever and lazy, you're not going to work that hard, so you're going to be able to tell people what to do. And clever and diligent, I don't know, placed in general staff. I'm not really sure. Why would you put the clever lazy people in charge of the clever, diligent people? Can you think of any reason? I can think of some reasons. Sometimes it's fun to think like something that's totally counterintuitive and think about a reason. So, how could this be useful in a corporate setting today? How could it be harmful? How is it useful to ignore intent? Is it nice? Does it make it feel better? You can ignore intent because you hurt my feelings, regardless of whether you intended to, or you bumped into my car in the parking lot, regardless of whether you intended to. Is it useful or not useful? If you want to get closer to the truth, I'm not talking about protecting people's feelings or whatever. I'm talking about you want to get closer to the truth, which is good thinking. That's our topic. There's other topics. There's other reasons. But to get closer to the truth, is it useful to ignore intent? So Michael says, the clever ones will make sure that the job gets done. The clever, lazy ones will make sure the job gets done. And I kind of think that's a really good point because they'll make sure someone else does it so they don't have to. I think that's kind of what this guy, this German general thought. So there are a lot of biases that come into play when it comes to Hanlon's razor, the confirmation bias. We tend to look for information. So if we think that this person is out to get us, we're going to find evidence that they have evil intent. Availability heuristic. We remember that last time they did this mean thing to us. Chances are this is because they're evil people. Or even the affect heuristic or the affect bias, where feelings of like and dislike. I don't like that person, so they must have evil intent. But the point of good thinking, again, is the journey toward the truth. And so it's good to be aware of both Occam's razor, all these assumptions you have to use to that you carve away to see if you, and also to see if you can simplify your explanations to help communicate better. That can be a good way to use Occam's razor. So what does it look like for people and institutions? What does this look like? Should we assume neglect or incompetence in the same way? Should neglect and incompetence be assumed in the same way? Because Hanlon says, okay, as long as it's not evil, all these other things are lumped together. Well, we like to attribute our own flaws and failures to someone else. I like that. I failed today. I fell on the stairs today because I don't know who I can blame, but I'm going to try to find someone to blame. But it's a cheap psychological protective mechanism called projection, and it really doesn't help. So if we say, okay, I failed because you had an evil intent or you were malicious, it's good to take a step back and just remember, Occam's razor might shave us closest to the truth. There are exceptions. And it's been widely contested, both of these. The critics consider Hanlon's razor to be overly naive, and maybe it is because it blinds people to true malice. But I don't think that the use of the razor means that you have to use it exclusively and rely on it like a law. It's a heuristic. It's a rule of thumb. It's a little thing to check. Check yourself before you wreck yourself, before you cut yourself. Razors can be powerful tools, but they prove nothing. They do serve as helpful devices in decision making and seeing the world closer to how it is. And do you want to know when they work best? Who knows when they work best? Who knows when they work best? Anyone? They work best when evaluating your own beliefs with an open mind rather than convincing someone else that their position has been cut. If you want to hear more about different kinds of razors because you think this is interesting, let us know in the chat. More razors, more razors. You don't want more razors? No more razors. It's fine. Next week is going to be a very controversial topic, so look for the post. I'll give you a little hint. Is there a downside to critical thinking? The answer might surprise you. Anyway, hope you have a good week. Thank you for being here, good thinkers, and we'll see you next Monday.